Hey guys, today is the 21st day. That means we are reading Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 through 7. So I kind of titled this today's reading as kind of the nature of faith, kind of understanding really what is faith. Up until this point, the writer of Hebrews is talking about how Jesus is better, how he is better than anything in the Old Testament. And now we're moving to through that. We looked yesterday, persevere in faith, to not sin, to have faith in God. But now he's going to give an explanation or define what faith is. And we can see that definition in the very first verse of today's reading, verse number 1. Faith is an assurance of things hoped for, and it's a conviction of things not seen. Now, there's a couple things here in verse 1. There's two big words that should stick out: the word assurance, the word conviction. Faith is not just a thought. It's not just an idea. It's not something that you feel, but faith is something that you are assured of, right? So we see these words assurance and conviction. And what do we have assurance in, and what are we convicted in? We have assurance for things hoped for. That's future tense, right? So we have assurance of the future, and we have a conviction of things not seen. That is the past. So if you want the Sean Watson kind of definition, it is faith is in what God has done and in what God will do. And we're going to see this. We're going to see some examples of this. And we kind of see this in verses 2 and 3, right? So in verse 2, for by it the people of the old receive condemnation. So we get this idea that people of the Old Testament were still saved by faith, not by works, not by the law, but it was by faith. And then in verse 3, we kind of see this, that he talks about the creation of the world. None of us have seen the creation of the world. We have faith in things not seen. We have things of the past. We have faith in things that God has done in the past, but we also are assured, or we have hope for, we have faith in things of the future. A little side note, that's what we're going to be preaching on Sunday, looking at 1 Peter. But we get three examples in the rest of today's reading. We get three people, three saints that really the writer picks out of the very beginning of the book of Genesis. We get Abel, we get Enoch, and we get Noah. And so in these three stories, it gives us a little bit better definition of what faith is, a little insight into each character. Let's start with the verse 4 with Abel, right? Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. If you remember the story, Cain and Abel were brothers, and they were bringing a sacrifice to God. One brings vegetables and grapes and grain, and the other kills an animal and brings meat. And in Genesis, we find out that Abel, who brought the meat, his sacrifice was better. God accepted that, but did not accept Cain's. Now, we don't know why in Genesis. We don't really understand all the way until we get to today's reading, until Hebrews, of what that is. And so there's a lot of confusion and a lot of people with a lot of ideas. But the reality is what have we been talking about in Hebrews? We've been talking about the high priest, the temple, the sacrifice, the priest, the altar, the Holy of Holies, the blood on the Ark of the Covenant. And so in faith, there's something that makes faith, and that is blood. And so Abel is put here, and he says that he is through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. Is really talking about faith through blood. Abel, even though before everything, knew that there was going to need a faith, and that faith was going to need blood. There was going to be something that was going to be killed to cover up the sins that he's done. Just like when Adam and Eve were kicked out, God killed an animal and fashioned clothing to cover them, to cover their sins and kick them out of the garden, right? So the first thing we can see through Abel is faith is through blood, right? Our faith today is through the blood of Jesus Christ. Then we see Enoch. Enoch is an unusual story. It's in Genesis chapter 5. But basically, in Enoch's story, if you go back to Genesis chapter 5, it mentions twice that he walked with God. Enoch had this relationship with God that was so close and that was so devout that God did not let Enoch die. He took him up before he died. And so we can see through Enoch that he was taken up, and because of this, we can understand that faith is through blood, that was Abel, but also faith is with walking through God. It's not just an idea, it's not just a thought, but there are some things that prove our faith, and that is walking with God. And then in verse 7, we get to Noah. We all know Noah, right? Noah, he built an arky, right? He built a boat. But Noah being warned by God concerning events that has yet unseen. Okay, remember, unseen remember verse 1? It's a conviction of things not seen. When you talk about faith and things, believing in something not unseen, there's really not a better example than Noah, right? God says, hey, I'm going to flood the earth with rain. He has no idea what rain is. They've never seen rain until this happens. But God comes down and says this, and he listened to God, and he obeyed God, and he went against the culture, against the world. And so we can see that faith is radical obedience. And so now we can see that faith is assurance of things hoped for, the future. It is convictions of things in the past. It is through blood. Faith is through blood. Faith is walking with God, and faith is in radical obedience. It says in verse 7, by this he condemned the world and became an heir of righteousness that comes by faith. He condemned the world. He chose not to listen to his peers in the culture making fun of him while he's building the ark, but he was obeying who God is. And so we've been talking about why Jesus is better. We've been talking about that it is through faith that Jesus brings salvation. And now in chapter 11, we're getting this definition. And we're going to see time and time again all of these explanations of what faith is. Faith is assurance of the future and convictions of things of the past that we have not seen. Guys, I hope this makes sense, and we'll continue tomorrow. We'll see you. God bless.